So if I handed you $250,000 tomorrow, would your business turn that into value, or would it just burn in the gap between your vision and your execution? Well, today's guest has helped countless founders close that gap with practical frameworks and disciplined systems. So welcome back to the Business Behind Your Business podcast, where we uncover the strategies and tools that are going to help you as you run your small or medium business build a stronger business, a smarter business. And in this episode, we're going to explore how to bridge some of that visionary thinking and turn that into operational rigor, because the big ideas need a solid system to succeed. So today, we're going to unpack a few things. We're going to learn about this CPR framework. I won't spoil what that's going to be. I'll let our guests go into the detail, but the CPR framework is going to stop you building backwards and focus on what truly matters. We're going to discover how to avoid that mistake where if I gave you $250,000, you would just burn that without executing on your vision. And we're going to gain some practical steps to create a responsible spending culture that treats every dollar like it's your own. Rodrigo Rodriguez-Novás is the founder and CEO of NORDES Consulting, a boutique firm specializing in financial leadership, operational efficiency, mergers and acquisitions, execution. And he's got over 20 years of global experience in finance and operations. Now, Rodrigo combines that strategic insight with practical discipline. He's a certified project management professional, an MBA graduate from EGAD Business School, and he studied at LSE Wharton, University of Peace. And he's also, most importantly, the author of the CFO Myth and a business school professor, passionate about helping leaders navigate complexity with clarity and confidence. So, Rodrigo, welcome to the Business Behind Your Business.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's an honor being here and looking forward to sharing with you and your audience the next 30 minutes or so.
The CPR test, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of CPR is I'm thinking of emergency room, I'm thinking of business in crisis, I'm thinking some real help is needed and we need to get stuck in very quickly and focus on the most important things. You're a man of focus. What is the foundation of that CPR framework? Am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. And this was actually a beautiful coincidence, not by default when I crafted the CPR methodology, but ended up working out quite nicely and indeed very well much aligned to the healthcare space of as we relate a business to its health, right? Or as we assess the health of a business. CPR methodology essentially is a framework that I worked on for quite a long time as I tried to seek a good, sustainable methodology for founders, entrepreneurs, even established businesses to have um, a clear line of sight as to how to properly allocate resources. One of the most difficult things that I see out there people do is not knowing where to put their money, not knowing where to put their funds. We hear a lot about people raising money, raising capital, and a lot of them make the assumption that as long as they're able to raise money, they're going to be okay. And sadly, that couldn't be further from the reality, or at least the reality that I have seen, experience, and seen other people go through. So I had a calling to figure out a way in which how can I, as a finance professional, explain this to people in a way that makes better sense? And ultimately, I landed in the CPR methodology where the C stands for the core, the P stands for priorities, and the R stands for resources. And this is a 3-step methodology in which the most important aspect of it is the C. Because if you don't know what your core is, if you don't know where that heartbeat of the business is, it doesn't matter how much money you raise, it doesn't matter how good your product is, chances are you're going to probably fail. So we start by looking at the core of the business. Why does this business exist? And more important, what is it from this business that is going to bring you the first dollar in revenue, right? So do you know what you need to do to bring revenue through the door? Sadly, we see people that have brilliant ideas, but is that idea something that the market needs? Is that idea something that someone is out there willing and able to buy? So once you figure out what your idea is, the step is, okay, what is the core of this business? What is the heartbeat of this business? What is this? How is this going to turn into revenue for the company? And I always remember one of the brilliant quotes from Steve Jobs when he was questioned about the way he was developing products at Apple. And he very clearly said is, we always start with the problem. We always start with the customer, right? And sadly, we still see a lot of people starting with their idea, not with what the customer needs, not with what the customer wants, not with what the market is ready for. Recently, I was working with a company that has a brilliant idea, but after doing validation, the market is not ready for it. So maybe they're a year, 2 years early into that idea and need to put it on pause before risking burning all of their capital because they're not going to be able to monetize on that product quite yet, right? So, long story short, the C stands for, again, identifying what your core is, what the heartbeat of that business is. Once you're clear on that, we move to the priorities, which is what do you need to do in order of priority to bring that core to life? What do you need to do to give that business a heartbeat? And then once you know what those priorities are, it's a lot easier to allocate the resources to each of those. So that's going to help you clarify, okay, these are the top activities I need to perform in order of priority, and I only have so much in capital. Where do you put that capital? How do you allocate it properly so that you get closer to the actual heartbeat of that business? So it was a way in which I was able to put an analogy in place to hopefully help, again, entrepreneurs that don't have the finance background to clearly and easily identify where to put their money, where to put their human capital, or any other type of resource. When we talk about resources here, is not 100% money. It could be any other resources. It could be your team. It could be your co-founders. It could be your network. It could be, anything that could help you bring that business to life and that business to get some traction.
So that's a really good way to look at it, a great framework. There's a quote which you're often quoted for is that most entrepreneurs are building their business backwards. What do you mean by that?
It's essentially that, right? I see a lot of people coming up with great ideas, but they're working on something that, again, the market may not need. There might not be a market for it, or there is plenty of it out there, and they're not looking at what's their differentiator. How are they going to be different than the competition? And not having that clarity, I think, is what ends up creating a lot of waste. In my opinion, I see money being put into work that is not necessarily required, into products or services that are not necessarily appealing to the market. So that's why I like to go back to that quote of, starting with the problem, starting with the challenge. What is the challenge you're trying to solve? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And then you get into the how we're going to solve it. I
Yeah.
see a lot of
Look,
people starting with the how before they know the what. And that's what I mean by sometimes doing it backwards.
yeah. Look, unfortunately, we see that a lot, way too many times, and it can be quite heartbreaking to observe somebody making those mistakes. And I know I did some work with one of the startup hubs in Sydney, and unfortunately, I had conversations with a few people who had skipped that first step, and they've gone down to the resources they need and the process and what it's going to look like in their marketing, but they'd actually ignored that foundation question of is what I'm developing a product that somebody wants to buy or needs to buy, and they went and spent a lot of money, and we're going to go on and talk about the $250,000 mistake. Unfortunately, some of these businesses they were pretty much making that mistake, and when it's your own money, it really hurts.
Indeed.
Yeah, it does. So the $250,000 mistake. We started the question with if we gave you that money, if we gave our listeners $250,000 for their business, would they be able to convert that into revenue generating, or would they just be burning the resource? Why is it that we light up when we see the funds coming in, but we don't execute correctly?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that the biggest hurdle is raising the money. I see a lot of entrepreneurs put big figures in their pitch decks. This is how much we're raising, but they don't have clarity in the use of funds. And even when they get the funds, it's like, okay, now I have, let's say, $250,000 in the bank. What do I do with it? And they just go out and start spending it like if the money is always going to be there, right? And making that assumption that if I was able to raise, I'm always going to be able to raise. There's always going to be money coming in. And I come from a place of scarcity. As an economist, you know that resources are limited and you need to make very careful choices with them, whether in business, in personal life, in any aspect. Resources are limited. So the opportunity cost of those resources is something that needs to come in play. And I don't see people taking that into account. People think that there's always going to be money on the table. They start going for the things that are not adding value. One of my favorite quotes is, "You need to put your money where the money comes from," right? So going back to the core of your business, what is it in your business that is going to generate you revenue to continue to go, to become sustainable, to become independent from external investors, and actually self-sufficient as a business? These are the questions that I don't see a lot of people asking themselves and their companies. So you get the usual, right? People start traveling to conferences and spending thousands of dollars in just exposure and marketing when they still don't have a product built. So shouldn't that money be going to your technology development? Shouldn't that money be going to research and development to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate for the market? Shouldn't, that money going to hiring critical resources that you don't have today, as opposed to the fancy and shiny things like travel and expenses in other things? Companies start hiring resources that may seem reasonable, but they're not the ones that they need at that particular stage, right? So you don't need a CFO, and this is, part of the purpose of the book. You don't need a CFO until you need one, and this is what I teach people. You don't need certain senior resources until it's time. Start with the resources that are going to help you execute, that are going to roll up their sleeves and bring your business to life, and help you get that MVP to the market, and help you get that first customer contract, and help you execute on that first contract, and help you bring in that little bit of revenue, that traction, and then prioritize the resource spending properly. And that is unfortunately something that I don't see as mainstream. I still see people just treating money as if it's always going to be there, going out there, buying expensive software, buying expensive and shiny objects, and spending on things that are not going to add value to the bottom line or to the top line.
Yeah, what you're explaining, it is a sad situation because I think there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of the common thread of the advice that I'm seeing out there is that you need to have all of your frameworks set up. And when we talk about framework, your HR, so you need to have your finance, your marketing, your sales, your development. You need to have all of these roles filled, and you need to have this huge amount of capital raise. But it seems to go opposite against what you've been saying. Also, fortunately, what a lot of our other previous guests on the business behind your business have been saying is that you actually need to focus on the core activities before you go and do those things. And you don't need to, like you said, you don't need a CFO. You can outsource the roles that you need, but you don't need a full-time resource. You don't need full-time marketing, particularly if you don't have a product that people want to buy to start with. So yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's a real. I'm not going to say shame. It's a real travesty that we're still hearing so much that we need to have these big systems. Well, I guess HR systems with all the big roles, and I think if you're coming from a larger corporate down into small medium business, you're being misled thinking that you've got to have all of those roles in a full time capacity before you start your business.
Absolutely, and I've had a couple of experiences with companies I've become familiar with, where you have a company that has barely started to generate revenue, and they had a C-suite that was the equivalent of a multi-million dollar revenue generating company. You're like, where's the common sense behind that, right? Like, you cannot have and I'm speaking to myself, and some people tell me, so, oh, you're a CFO telling people they don't need a CFO. And I'm like, yeah, you're absolutely right, because I want these people to succeed. I want these people to make it to the point where actually they need a CFO, and when they bring the CFO, it's going to be sustainable, and it's going to be there for the long term. Because otherwise, you're going to bring in this expensive C-suite early on, and in 2 months, 6 months, a year, you're not going to have a company, because it's not going to be sustainable as a business. And then the other thing around this is the reality in the market is that about 95% of businesses out there are not financial businesses. They are, everything else but finance. The other thing that strikes me is that recent studies are pointing out to over 70% of people in the world not having basic financial knowledge. And then when you put those two things together, you're like, the reality is very brutal. You have a lot of people running businesses that don't know anything about finance. And the reality, whether we like it or not, is that if there is one thing that every single business has in common, regardless of industry, regardless of size, regardless of geography, is finance. Every single business exists to generate a profit. Every single business has to hire resources. Every single business has to pay their bills, has to pay their employees, has to bring money in, has to put money out. So when you look at accounting and finance, it's something that, once again, it doesn't matter your type of business, the nature of the business, you need to know the basics. And if we, as owners of the business, as founders, as entrepreneurs, fail to know the basics, then we are in a big trouble.
And I guess that what you've just been explaining is how it's so easy to burn $250,000, and we're using that as a round number, but it could be $20,000, it could be $50,000, or it could be $1 million that you've raised. But if you don't have, I guess, to use one of your terms, the correct spending culture, you're going to burn through that cash very quickly and not actually be advancing on your core reasons for why you're in business. So, how do we bridge that gap between the core values and, I guess, delivering, having the right resources and delivering on that process?
Yeah, and here is where the CPR methodology to me comes in place, which is starting from the basics. Is what is important in your business? What do you need to do as a company? What do you need to deliver to your customer? What do you need to deliver to your investors? Get the facts right. Once you know what the facts are, and what that, essentially take that big picture into actionable steps of, okay, this is, our end state, but how do we get there, right? So what is the first step we need to take to get there, and start prioritizing in that particular order? Because at the end of the day, we all, as entrepreneurs, have a long-term vision, a dream, but if you don't take the first couple steps right, you're never going to get there. So what do we need to do, and in what sequence we need to do those actions in order to get there? And that's to me is basics. The other thing that to me is critical for teams and companies, as it relates to not burning the money and actually delivering, is one of the other misconceptions or myth out there, which is that finance is only the responsibility of the finance team, or finance is the job of the CFO and his team or her team. And that couldn't be any farther from the reality, right? Finance is something that should be ingrained in the DNA of every single employee of every single company, because at the end of the day, whether we are in the finance organization or in any other organization of that particular company, we all touch and impact money, whether it is in the bottom line, whether it is in the top line. If you're in sales, your job is to generate money and bring money in. If you are in any other operations or technology, your job may not be to generate revenue, but how do you spend the money that comes in or that you have? It's important. And at the end of the day, we all spend money in the company. We all have an impact on money. We all can make a difference in being more effective and more efficient with the resources. So creating that healthy financial culture, to me, is essential. Is one of the pillars to me of a successful company. And this is something that, to your earlier point, right, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about 250K, whether you're talking about millions. It's something that, if you don't have a healthy relationship with money in your company, eventually you're going to dry out. Eventually you're going to run out of money. And this is something that happens in the daily events, in the small things, right? You have a team going to a conference, and one of the things that I dislike the most, and I hear it too often, is, well, we have a budget for $1,000. The fact that you have a budget for $1,000 doesn't mean that you have to go out, run out there and run the car for $1,000, right? If you can find a hotel that is half the price of the other, and it's right across the street, and it's just as good, why are you going to the $500 a night hotel versus the $200 a night hotel right across the street, right? Simply because the company is paying for it, it doesn't mean that it's right. Simply because the company can afford that, it doesn't mean that it's right. And sadly, that's something that happens a lot in companies when employees feel that the company has money or that the company can afford it, and it's one of those really bad cultural behaviors that I see more often than I would like to.
Yeah, I think you certainly nailed it there. Is that there's an idea that when it's somebody else's money or there's the restrictions on you spending it are lifted for some reason. And I see not just with employees, but and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well. But business owners who have come from that background where they have had the corporate expense card and could spend whatever they basically needed to, whatever the budget was. They've come to their own smaller business, they're treating it the same way. They're treating the company's funds as their own personal funds and not worrying about how much they spend. You've got a principle that you apply to this. Can you just explain a bit more about that concept of risk spending the coffee shop principle?
Right. So, as far as the coffee shop principle, that to me is something that came from working with a particular business and realizing as I was working on the methodology and writing the book, I had the opportunity to work with this particular entrepreneur. And the realization was that sometimes people that treat money like their own do it better because they know how painful it is. So these are the people that simply because it's their money, they don't have a lot to pull from. They are a lot wiser into how they spend it. They are more cautious as to how they spend it. And those are the ones that I've seen become much more successful. And as I started looking and researching into that, it's interesting because two things come to mind, and they're not necessarily the same. But on one hand, you have the people that you tell them treat money like if it was your own, and then you realize it's like, well, these people have a really bad relationship with money, so that doesn't really work. But then you have, to me, what are the exceptions to the rule, and the real entrepreneurs that have started from scratch, that their business wasn't given to them by someone else, that they put the first brick of that business, that they bought the first grain of coffee to serve a cup of coffee to a customer, and have done it with common sense based methodology. And to me, one of the most important things in business and in finance, and especially when it comes to allocating resources, is common sense. And when I see entrepreneurs like this one doing things cautiously, saying no until he or she is ready, waiting for the right conditions to take place before taking the next big step, those are things that I've seen make a huge difference. This particular individual was someone who has a remarkable business. He started a business based on a unique differentiator, which is the quality of the coffee that he serves. And it's one of the best coffees I've had in my life. And I'm a coffeeholic, so you can take me on for that one. But the reality is, he started a business very much in the garage of his house, to put it some way, and little by little started growing, learning by trial and error, learning by everyday experience, learning by listening to his customers, doing things in a very methodical way, and even saying no to the opportunity of receiving external money, receiving funding, expanding faster, because he had the maturity to say, I'm not ready for this. My business is not ready to scale quite yet. I need to put in better controls. I need to put in better processes. I need to have the right team in these particular functions. So when you take the time and bring in a little methodology, a little bit of common sense, and you're not rushing into doing things faster just because it's what seems right, I think the chances of succeeding are much greater. So this is all coming back to my principle of bringing common sense to business and doing things with a little bit of methodology and best practices that again don't cost a lot of money. You don't need expensive software. You don't need expensive resources. You just need to put in place some basic controls and do things with some basic methodologies that allow you to get there, and then eventually, grow much faster.
So I think one of the things I'm hearing there is that responsible spending, common sense, but also that you don't necessarily need to go and buy the resources, hire those people at this point, and we don't necessarily need to grow at a rapid rate. Sometimes slow growth is the best kind of growth, particularly when we're building a solid, core to our business, the core understanding of our product, our clients, our customers' needs, and the processes that we need to have in place. Getting that core right is foundational.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that is important to think about is your growth going to be sustainable or not, right? I think the question around sustainability is just as important as the question of are you growing, because there is often the temptation, especially when you talk to startup founders and people that are in the space of companies that have raised money from investors. They have that pressure to grow faster. They have that pressure to deliver. They have the pressure to expand. And some of the basic failures that I see in those cases is they start launching more lines of product. They start launching more things before they validate the first one. So um, speed is not always best, right? In some cases, yes, you need to be fast, you need to have a good time to market, but that doesn't mean launch 10 lines of business before you validate the first one and before you have a strong operation behind it. On the other hand, going back to the coffee shop example, this is a business that, yeah, could you grow faster? Absolutely. But are you going to be able to deliver on those customers? Because on one side, leasing another location, setting up another shop is very easy, but are you going to have the quality coffee to serve all those new customers? If your basics is, and if the core of your business is the quality of the coffee that you serve, and you're going to, some of the most remote locations to curate the coffee that you bring into your stores, do you have the supply chain behind your business to support an additional store or an additional 10 stores? The answer may be not. The answer may be I need to focus a little bit more on my supply chain, on my operations before I can continue to grow. So again, having the humility as an entrepreneur to identify where your weak links are, I think is important. And ultimately, in my opinion, it's more important to guarantee a sustainable growth rate than a faster growth that eventually may die.
Yeah, no, definitely hearing what you're telling us, and I think there's a lot more that we could go into in detail. I think the best place to find out more and to dive deeper into not just the CFO myth, but the practical tools, the CPR framework that you've already mentioned to us, and you've given us, I guess, a really good overview of how they work. But I think, yeah, if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, I really need to dive deeper into this and get my hands on the practical steps to move forward. The good news is, like we said at the beginning, Rodrigo, he's put it all in writing. He's published the CFO Myth book, practical tools, including the CPR framework and some other interesting challenges in there, which unfortunately we haven't had time to go into today, such as the $1,000 spending challenge, which we love to hear your feedback on that, as well as plenty of actionable strategies to bridge between your vision for your business and executing without wasting resources. So what you can do is go to cfomyth.com for the free resources and insights, and also to purchase your copy of the book and connect with Rodrigo on LinkedIn. We're going to publish the links to that in the show notes and also on the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website. Fascinating to hear, I guess, some real practical, down-to-earth, common sense approach from somebody who's been there at the top end, large corporate, and working with small, medium businesses. Rodrigo, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Business Behind Your Business podcast.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. And again, it's been an honor to share with you. And hopefully, I can benefit your audience with some of these practical resources.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Business Behind Your Business. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and valuable for your business journey. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with fellow business owners who could benefit, and send in your burning questions because we love hearing from you. Missed any of our previous episodes or looking for additional resources to help grow your business? Head over to our website at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. There you'll find our full archive of past episodes along with show notes, transcripts, and links to valuable resources mentioned in each episode. Your journey to business success continues at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and keep building the business of your dreams.